In this video, we're looking at a position inquiry builder that's available in ProSoft version 7.7 and above. And in particular, we're looking at the ability of the inquiry to time information. Now, some of you may be familiar with the time position report, which takes open and outstanding values against a contract and looks to time them into future periods. Well, this is doing pretty much the same thing, but with a bit of extra flexibility added into it. So to keep the demonstration simple, we're just looking at two contracts, one purchase contract and one sale contract. They're for the same product, but they have different prices against them, different tonnages and different delivery periods. So we see one purchase contract on the top line of this inquiry, P1015, it's for 1,000 tonnes at $180 US, and one sale contract for 1,200 tonnes at $150 US. We've also got different delivery periods against them, and so we'll see the effect in these timing buckets that we see over on the right hand side. So for now, just take the time to explain some of the settings that I've set up against this inquiry. You can see I've given it a position report ID of A time 1. I've got my report unit of measure set to metric tonnes, and in this case my report currency set to transaction, which means it's going to go against the currency that's set against the contract. I've got it restricted to the one product using this filter, and I'm only selecting purchase and sale contracts, even though I could have included some other types of documents. Down against my time calculations in this section, I've got time calculations checked. I've got my period set to 2 and my radio buttons set to weeks. I've also got my start date set to the 1st of the current month and the value that I want to time set to quantity. Now what that means in terms of the timing is the system is going to look at the contracts that I'm putting into my inquiry and work out what periods my tonnages will fall into. So that's starting on the 1st of Feb and then calculating every 2 weeks from there. I have 15 timing periods all up, so that means my projection will go from the 2 weeks commencing from the 1st to the 14th and then to end up at the end of June. Two of those categories also capture any amounts that are earlier or later than those dates. And so I'll also have one that captures anything that's prior to February the 1st and anything that's after the end of June. And once we've reviewed that, we're going to have a look at what happens when we change some of the settings within the inquiry. In particular, we're going to look at what happens when we set the value to time to be contract price. And we're also going to look at what happens when we change this checkbox here, which is convert contracts at the hedged rate. And so we'll be able to have a look at unhedged as well as hedged positions. And then we're also going to play with this add expected payment terms onto timing to see or get an idea on how the cash flow is going to work against these contracts. So when we build that data into the inquiry, you can see that I've selected A time 1 at the top here and clicked on my get report. You can see we have the one purchase and sale contract. Now overall we're 200 tonnes short in our position, but we can see those tonnages spread over these buckets starting from February the 1st, moving on to Feb 15 and continuing across the screen and off the screen as well. And if we look at the position in the first month, we can see we're actually 8 tonnes long, 9 tonnes long in the next couple of weeks, and that continues on until we get to the week commencing March 28 when we're 228 tonnes short. So it's not until that period in March that we're actually going to have a problem with our tonnages. And so this inquiry allows us to manage that. So we'll move on to some of the other inquiries that we've set up in the background now. Now you see on this contract I had my report builder set to build in the transaction currency, so that's the currency that's against the contract. So I can see my purchase contract is for $180 US and my sale contract is for $150 US. If I then move on to select my second report and build the data in, you can see that overall we're still 200 tonnes short, but in my timing buckets across here, we can see that the values are quite different, and that's because we're getting contract price rather than quantity in there. And you can also see that my contract price has now expressed itself in Australian dollars. And in this case, I've asked it to not do it at the contract hedge rate, but at the system rate. So we see my purchase contract come in at 200 Australian dollars, and my sale contract come in at 166 Australian dollars, and so that's those US dollars converted to whatever today's exchange rate is. You can see that on February 1st I'm going to accrue about $47,000 worth of expense against that contract, and I'm also going to invoice about $38,000 against the sale contract. So overall we'll be about $9,500 short in what we accrue versus what we invoice in that period. And that continues on across the other months. So this could be useful in comparing my my currency hedges to make sure that this exposure that I've got here is actually hedged correctly. If I move on now to my third report. Now this report is set up pretty much identical as my second report. It's timing the contract value again, but in this case I've checked that if a particular contract is hedged, I want to use that hedged rate to build into my inquiry. So you can see that my sales contract has remained the same at 166 Australian dollars, but my purchase contract is converted into 144 Australian dollars. That's because I've got quite a low exchange rate hedged against my purchase contract. And so now if we look at our timing buckets, you can see that in this first period, commencing the February the 1st, well, my outgoings is expected to be 34,000, my incoming is expected to be 38,000, and so overall I'm actually about fourth in the black. And so that shows that if we take the rate that we fixed against each contract, it means the values will match much better from period to period, and we won't be so exposed. If we move on now to the fourth report. Now for this particular report, again, I'm timing my contract values. I've got it to convert it to my system rate. And so you can still see that we're 200 tonnes short overall. But I've also checked to add the expected payment terms against each contract onto my timing. Now my sale contract has been issued with terms of 30 days end a month, whereas my purchase contract has terms of 7 days net. And so what we see in the first period is that we've got an outgoing against the purchase contract, an expected payment of 38,000, whereas our receipts based on the delivery against that contract and then adding on an allowance for the payment terms against that invoice, we won't receive that until at least the following 2 weeks. So from period to period, we've got quite a shortfall, and that may be something that we want to investigate further. And if I look at my last report, which is number 5, now this one's identical to number 4, except in this case I've asked it to give me my hedged rates. So in the case of my purchase contract, which did have a hedged rate against it, I still get to see my outgoings at the time in this first bucket, but it's based on it being, so it may be that I have an FEC that's expected to be delivered against that contract at that particular time, and so my actual cash impact won't be quite as bad as what we saw when we didn't include those hedge rates in the last inquiry. So then this gives us a very clear idea on how the cash flow might pan out against these contracts over the ensuing period. Now in those couple of examples, we've examined some pretty complex scenarios. We've got hedged rates and foreign currency. Of course, this inquiry still applies if you don't deal in those kind of things. We have kept it fairly simple in terms of the fact that we're just looking at 2 contracts, but if you keep in mind that this can be expanded out to many different contracts and currency and products, you can get a sense of how that inquiry can help you to manage those complex scenarios and give you an idea on how your cash flow is going to work out, how your tonnages are going to work out. You'll be able to see what tonnages are coming in, what tonnages are going out, and so therefore do some resource planning, ensuring that you can manage those future tonnages, that risk and that cash flow. Remembering also that we retrieve this information instantaneously, so it gives us the ability to collate that information based on live data as it's being processed by other people in the system. And we have an ability to easily export that into Excel if we need to do further analysis or adjust the figures in any way. When you also consider that you have the ability to add order entry, inventory and purchase order lines, and then calculate and time those different values, you can see that this inquiry is a very flexible tool, and it can apply to lots of different circumstances, whether you deal in foreign currency or not. Another example might be buying domestic and selling track, and you want to make sure that those cash flows add up, or what your expected cash flow is likely to be. In addition to that, my contracts were set to fairly linear delivery periods, but within the actual system, we can put very specific delivery dates, and the system will also adjust my anticipated deliveries in those various buckets based on the dates of any logistics transactions that I have scheduled in the future against those contracts.